Helen and talking about your latest books, which I love all of your books. But first, let's just get right into it. Helen, you are a renowned historian, art historian. Your work is, you're well respected in your industry. So can you tell us what led you to Murder, A Life of Crime?
I like reading mysteries. And I think sometimes when I was reading them, I would think, oh, there's something wrong with this plot, or it's too coincidental, it's not believable. You know how you get frustrated, and the old motto about if you don't like what you read in the newspaper, start one of your own. Well, this was just similar to that. I thought maybe I could do it. Maybe I could do it better than some of the authors that I've been reading, although not yours because I hadn't read them yet. I started this quite a few years ago. And the first one, An Exquisite Corpse, I kind of wrote over a long period of time. It just was very episodic, and the book is structured that way. It is very episodic. But it was just kind of an exercise to see if I could make a story that made sense, that was engaging, that had a mysterious quality to it, and that was entertaining. And I decided to use the surrealist milieu of New York in 1943 because I know quite a bit about it, and because it was an intriguing time when there was an awful lot going on in New York. The war refugees were here, and the art scene was very lively and very, the American artists were looking up to the Europeans and trying to surpass them. So there was a lot of emotional tension. And I thought I could use that. I could work with that. So the first person I killed was Wilfredo Lam, who was a member of the Surrealist Circle. And I chose him because he was Cuban, but his family was half Cuban and or half Spanish and half, he was mulatto. So he was half African American. And I thought that he would have a good, Oriental was his other side. He was Asian. His father was Chinese. So I thought he would make a very interesting way of getting two different communities involved in this, the Spanish Harlem, where many Cuban refugees were living, and also people from Chinatown. So that was an interesting mix. Of course, he did not die when I killed him. He actually was not even in New York at the time. Right. As you can see, he died in 1982 in Paris, actually. He was in Cuba when the story is set. So I just plucked him out of Cuba, took him to New York, and murdered him.
And did you already know a lot about him as an artist before? Did that also weigh into your selecting him as a victim?
Yes, although it's interesting, I didn't know as much about him as I did right after the book came out, because there was a big Lam retrospective in in London, and I saw it. I just happened to be in London right after the book came out, and there it was. And so I learned quite a bit more about him than I had known. But just the fact that he had this dual nationality, and that it led me into aspects of New York that I could exploit, was very intriguing to me. And I wanted to use real people because, there are certain other books where you have real and imagined characters together. I guess one of the best examples is Ragtime, where Dr. O invented this character named Coalhouse Walker, and he operates in a milieu of real New York people, including Stanford White and the then chief of police of New York. He goes to the Morgan Library and invades the Morgan Library as a real place. So there was an element of reality in which you could ground the story and then take as much in the way of liberties as you want. And of course, there are plenty of invented characters as well.
Right. And in that first book, you created two detectives that carry through all three of your books. Can you tell us about Juanita Diaz and Brian Fitzgerald and how you came up with them?
Well, the Greenwich Village, at the time, the 6th precinct was the main precinct in Greenwich Village, and that's where this mostly takes place. And that precinct house, I had to have cops in the precinct house, which, as a matter of fact, that is now a condo, and it's called Le Gendarme.
Oh, wow.
But so that building is where the precinct was headquartered at the time. And so I had a fictional officer, a Fitzgerald, and then he has to go and investigate in Spanish Harlem because they're trying to find the connection between Lam and a possible connection with a drug ring in Spanish Harlem. So when he goes up to investigate in Spanish Harlem, of course, he has to liaise with the local precinct, the 23rd. And I thought, well, let's give him a female officer to work with, because there were female officers on the force at the time. In fact, Diaz, fictionally, but in real life, could have taken the very first exam that was ever offered for female police officers. She was the right age. So, you know, I have to say that having the internet as a source for looking things up is just, it made it so much easier for me in terms of research. Because when I looked up female police officers in the 1940s, I found this fact that it was only in 1938 or 9 that they first offered female officers to take the exam to join the force. So there were a lot of things like that that I was able to pick up on through internet searches that were very, very helpful in setting the scene and making it authentic.
Well, I wondered about that because you certainly know a lot about the art world, but did you have to do a lot of research or meet with and talk to a lot of police officers?
No, actually, I don't know anyone who was on the force in 1943.
Any force, I mean, just to, you know, how the procedures go down. And
well, of course, it's very different today.
Right.
So I read the chief of police, Valentine, wrote a book called Nightstick. And I got that book online. I Googled it and I found it. And that was quite helpful because he joined the force in like 1918 or something. He was a real veteran. And he had a lot of background about what it was like being on the force in the 20s and 30s and 40s. I think he retired in around the late 40s and wrote the book. So things like that, that as you, if you Google search someone and you find out that they've written a book, then you can get the book and get the background.
Got it. And then your second book, moving on to that one, carries some of the same characters, and you're now from New York to Easthampton. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about An Accidental Corpse.
Well, the second book, I decided to carry over the two detectives because, well, they were police officers at the time. And then, of course, they fall in love, naturally. And they get married and they have a son. And so this is now set in 1956. And the couple is vacationing in Easthampton. And the reason I decided to move it to Easthampton was because I had the perfect victim, poor Edith Metzger, who actually did die. This when I said she did. The others have not. But Edith Metzger was a European refugee who came to this country with her family, escaping Hitler. So they were, I guess Edith was a child, as you can see in this child photograph. I could not find a photograph of her as a mature person. But her companion, Ruth Klingman, who is another character in the book, describes her in her own memoir as a beautiful girl with bright blue eyes and very dark hair in a pixie cut. So again, I went to the internet and I found a woman with beautiful blue eyes, very dark hair, and a pixie cut. So this is what I assume Edith Metzger would have looked like when she was alive at the age of 25, which is when she died. But in the film Pollock with Ed Harris and Marcia Gay Harden, she was played by Sally Murphy, who in the movie had lighter hair. But that photograph in color is supposedly what Edith Metzger would have looked like. And the story is about her death, but not as it really happened. You know, she was killed in the automobile accident in which Pollock also died, and Ruth Klingman survived and wrote her own memoir called Love Affair, in which she talks about Edith. But in my book, she is killed, she's dead before the car crash. And the mystery is who killed her, which I'm not going to give away.
But I will ask you to tell one of my favorite stories that you told us when we first met you, which was a little brush with forensics you had in your role as director of the Jackson, the Pollock Krasner House, with Ruth Klingman, and claiming she had a painting of Jackson Pollock's, and you did have to dip into some investigative work there. Can you tell everybody about that? Because it's a great story.
Right. Well, Ruth, as I said, she survived the crash. She never came back to the house. She had actually lived with Jackson in the house for about a month or a little less. And she had gone back to the city. She was having second thoughts about the relationship. She went back to the city and she was pouring her heart out to her friend Edith. And she said, well, why don't you come out and visit with me for the weekend? I think she wanted company. So after the accident, she never returned, but she came back to the house after it opened as a museum. And her claim was that when she and Jackson were in the studio together, Jackson had given her a painting and pointed to it and said, that one's yours, Ruthie. And this was a fairly sizable, according to her, black painting from 1951. And of course, after the accident, she was in the hospital. Lee came back, lived in the house, owned the art, and Ruth never got her picture. But when she came to visit in the early 90s, she wanted to know if we still had it, if we could give it to her. I said, sorry, Ruth, even if we did, well, I didn't say this, but even if we did have it, we wouldn't have given it to her. But she was still looking for the damn picture 40 years later.
And there was also a painting that she claimed had been painted that you had to have someone come from St. John's University. Am I correct?
No, from John Jay College.
Yeah,
that was not done by us, but we were helpful in the investigation. She had a painting that she claimed Pollock painted in her presence. And the forensic analyst, who actually has been very helpful to me in these books, named Nick Petracco, came and did chemical testing. And he did find that the painting was painted at the Pollock house, but he could not determine who painted it. So I think it will never actually be resolved.
But wasn't there something about a hair from the rug that?
Oh, yeah, the polar bear hair, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a polar bear hair in the picture. And we actually have a polar bear rug in the house, although it's not on display because it's too fragile. But it clearly was there in 1956, and it made its way into the painting.
Right. Yeah. I think you told us once that he couldn't figure out why there was a polar bear hair.
Exactly. I mean, how likely would that be? But when he showed it to me and told me what it was, I laughed. And he said, well, why are you laughing? I said, well, we have a polar bear rug. So I took him up to the attic and showed it to him, and he took a sample, and sure enough, it was a polar bear hair.
And that's how he decisively knew that it was painted in the house. But
well, there were other clues as well. There was grass seed that was local. There was sand that was of the same type as what you find in the area. There was some fiber content from one of our rugs, a regular woven rug. So there were all these little bits and clues that, taken together, decisively showed that it was definitely painted at the house.
So is any of that, that type of investigation, did that excite you and inspire you to do mysteries as well?
No,
No?
it just reinforced my feeling that there was a lot of mystery to go around. And of course, in this case, I have a detective who is now, Juanita Diaz, is now graduated to being a detective, and her husband, who is no longer an officer, he is now the captain, and their son, Timothy Juan, 8 years old. And so they're fictional characters. And all the other people in the book are either real people like Earl Finch, who was the officer who found the body and who stood over it and shined his flashlight on it, and other people in town, the doctor, Dr. Abel, who was at the scene. So the police chief, you know, they're real people. But when because I wanted to have an authentic setting and to have real people speaking as they would. And of course, one of the people who was enormously helpful to me in that regard was Prudence Carabine, a 12th generation Bonnacker, née Talmage, who I asked her if she would read it just because I know she's an English teacher. So I said, look, don't correct my grammar. I understand, we have a copy editor, but could you please tell me if I'm getting the Bonnack right? Because I really didn't want to mess that up. And she was very, very helpful. And indeed, she said, you know, you got it pretty good. Finest kind. But then there are 2 living characters. See, the first book, everybody's now dead. The second book, 2 people are alive. Mike Collins, who I have as a boy interacting with Timothy Juan, known as TJ, and also Seal Downs, who just recently died, but she's in a crucial scene, and material that I used was based on an interview that she gave to Jeffrey Potter. So both of them, I approached them and I asked them if they were okay with what I had written. I said, Mike, you know, I shaved a couple of years. And he said, oh, that's okay. And then Seal, she said, did I really do that? And I said, well, you told Jeffrey Potter that you did. So she said, well, then I guess it's fine with me. So both of them okayed it. And I was very happy about that because I could have changed them into fictional people.
Right.
See, you know, if you run up against a stumbling block, this is the great thing about writing fiction. Just change it.
Right.
All my other books are at least as close as I could come to facts. I mean, you know, art history. But in this case, when I want to use Wilfredo Lam and he's not dead in 1943, I just kill him.
Okay, so moving along to your next book that's coming out, An Artful Corpse. Can you tell us how you chose your victim? You know, and also I want to say something. It's a little bit of a spoiler to know who the victim is because you don't reveal the victim till page 100.
I think anybody reading it can guess that I'm going to kill this guy off.
I guess so.
He comes off as a real jerk.
Yeah, you definitely there's no love lost between you and him. Could you please tell us about how you picked him in this book?
Well, he was a natural. I mean, this is a guy who made a lot of enemies. And I had recently seen the exhibition of his New School murals, which were donated to the Metropolitan Museum a few years ago. And they did a beautiful installation of it. And so he was kind of in the back of my mind. But I did take a lot of liberties with Tom. I mean, he was a very, as you can see from the photograph, from the painting, even the self-portrait, did not spare himself. But he was a very divisive figure. And so he was kind of an easy mark, if you would like. And also, I wanted to set it in New York again. And I wanted to use the Art Students League because there were so many colorful characters there. And I went to the league. I knew the league. And I know that it's so remarkably unchanged. You can walk in there and feel like you're back in the 1940s. It's amazing. Or even the 1840s. No, it wasn't that old. But the idea that the atmosphere is still there. The rooms are still there. The studio that Benton taught in is still there. And even some of the faculty, I think, are still there, mummified. But it's kind of a perfect place to kill somebody because it's a rabbit warren of rooms and spaces and all kinds of places where you could hide and hide things. It's full of lockers. It's full of nooks and crannies. So it has a lot of character of its own.
Definitely. And did you know a lot about Thomas Hart Benton before? Were you a fan of his work? And how do you feel? There's definitely, you write in the book a lot about how some people, you know, some critics were very pro and some were against it. Where do you come down on?
Oh yeah, he was artistically very polarizing, as well as his personality. But he was Pollock's teacher. And there's a wonderful book called Tom and Jack by Henry Adams that talks about the two of them, their relationship. And I know Carol Ann Marling, who wrote a biography of him. There were several biographies, and he wrote two memoirs or autobiographies, An American in Art and An Artist in America. So there's a huge amount of background information about him. And of course, being a specialist in American art, I did know quite a bit about him to begin with. So there was an enormous amount of material. And then of course I wanted to bring him into the 1960s in New York when, you know, New York was in turmoil. We were having all these anti-war protests, and he was very patriotic. And also Andy Warhol was on the scene. And of course, Warhol's populism was totally antithetical to Benton's populism. And that was another nice bone of contention, if you will. So I had an awful lot of material to work with.
Additionally, you had to have a whole music subplot at the bitter end and about some of the folk artists there as
well.
well.
I worked at the bitter end as well. So I thought I could bring that in because Tom was a big folk music fan. In fact, he did an album, Saturday Night at Tom Benton's. He used to have a kind of jug band that got together at his apartment and would have these Saturday night jam sessions. So I thought, well, let's, you know, have a musical side to it as well. And also Woody Guthrie died on the very night where I set this musical event. So those things, you know, bring in some of the other social history that's going on at the time.
And have you heard from any of the relatives or friends of any of these people, artists that you're killing off, or you're making suspects of the crime?
No, not yet. But well, Jessie Benton, Tom's daughter, is still living. She's, I think, in her 80s now. His son is no longer with us, but I don't know whether she's read the book. I kind of doubt that she has.
Right. And now, do you have any other artists that you're thinking of killing off?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes. I've actually finished another one.
Okay. Tell us about.
I won't tell you who died, but it's set in the 70s. Okay. So I'm doing it decade by decade.
Right.
And I have another one in the works that's set in the 80s.
Okay. And has any of it been, now that you're getting closer to, you know, the present, are there any ones that you've personally had contact with that you think, now I'm going to kill them off in my book? I really didn't like
well, the one I'm working on now, the person that I'm killing off is someone who was very well known to me personally. Okay. And if anyone deserved to die, no, he is now deceased. But he sometimes could be so frustrating that you wanted to strangle him. But a wonderful person, and you know, notwithstanding his temperament. But this is somebody that I often thought of killing, and I thought, well, now's the time to do it.
I guess so, and I guess we'll all know who it is when your next book comes out.
Well, no, this is the one I'm working on now. Okay. I'm only about 20,000 words into it, so I haven't got there yet. But the other one, number 4, is finished.
Okay.
And the publisher is looking at that now. And I have to give a shout out to the publisher, Source Books, who have been so supportive, and to you too, because they're your publisher as well.
Yes, they're really good publishers out of
Chicago.
And
I must say, Carrie was my first publisher of mysteries. She and her sister Liz, when they had Dunmere books, it was quite an interesting coincidence, actually. There was an article about them in the Star. And my husband spotted it. And he said, you know, these gals write mysteries and you write mysteries. Why don't you get in touch with them? And they came through and they brought out the first 2. and we're going to bring out this one, but then Dunmere was bought by Source Books, and the division that I'm with is called Poison Pen Press, which is, you know, quite appropriate. Exactly. And so they're now looking at the fourth one.
That's great. Yeah. So when you sent us the letter about your book, and you were very modest, and then we read the book, and at the time we were not sure what we were going to take on, but the first book we read was your second book, An Accidental Corpse. And what amazed us is, even though we've spent our whole life in Easthampton, we were born in the 70s, and so we were not born at that time, but it just felt so evocative of the old Easthampton that we knew. It reminded us, the way you write, the pacing, the feel, the descriptions, it brings you back in time. It reminded me of my childhood out here. And that just is one of the reasons that we totally responded. I mean, they're quick, you know, reads, but you also learn something. You learn so much in each of your books about the art world. And is it hard for you to weave in the reality of, you know, descriptions of you know, real descriptions of what these buildings and the history, and keep up with the pace of the fiction?
Well, that's the fun part, is to set it in a real setting, like the Seaspray Inn, which of course no longer exists. And I had friends who rented one of the cabins for many years. And we used to go over there every summer. We'd go to watch the fireworks with them and have a barbecue. But the house, the actual inn, was long gone. I think it was 1976 or something that it burned down. But one of the people who'd been a busboy there in the 50s wrote a memoir, which I found online. And this guy, Aarons, he had all the color, all the character of the place. It was just wonderful. And even the television set that was given to them by Arthur Murray, the dance instructor, that was given to the inn so that the people could watch TV. Who knew? But this is the kind of thing that if you're lucky enough to be able to find something that gives you that much detail, then you use it. You know, then you can easily set a scene in one of those locations because you have the real setting for it.
And do you think you'll be setting more books in Easthampton?
Well, the fourth one is set in Easthampton. So I'm alternating, I guess. I've got Easthampton, New York. First I had New York, then Easthampton, then New York, now Easthampton. And the fifth one is actually set in New York City. But I may come back to Easthampton, who knows? And your books are all set in Easthampton, right?
Yes, I guess there's a lot of murderers in Easthampton.
And we're not the only ones. I mean, there are others too.
And I think the more people move to Easthampton, the more people we want to murder.
There you go. I think we have an unending source.
Exactly. Every day someone's presenting themselves. Of course, you are dealing with the artists, but you know, I like to kill off the hedge funders and the other obnoxious people.
I think you have to kill off Antonia's ex-husband.
Oh yeah, I definitely.
Yeah, we don't like him.
No. It's fun. It's fun. I got into I have a new series, and I just had a little spat in the spring with someone about that sort of blew up in the press. And anyway, now I'm killing off that person in my book. So.
Well, I have to say that the best compliment that I had about the first one was from someone who actually knew some of these people. And she was young, and she said, you know, she was growing up in the art world, and she knew Harold Rosenberg and David Hare and, you know, Elaine de Kooning, some of the people the characters in the book. And her compliment was that she could hear them talking. So that
that's a great
if you get the voice right, then I think the story has a really authentic feel to it. If they're saying things that they wouldn't have said, or if you're using modern slang, I mean, that's one of the challenges, is to be sure that you're using terminology that would have been used at the time, and not bring in appellations and words that are just would not have been in common use or even invented at that time.
That's true. In an artful course, you have a character saying "far out," and I remember first I thought, who would say "far out" now? But of course, back then, someone would
In
say.
1967, everybody was far out.
And do you have any idea what someone like Jackson Pollock would think of your books? I mean, your book about him? Would he have a sense of humor?
Well, it paints a fairly accurate picture. He's not much of a character, actually, because he gets killed fairly early on.
Right.
But his drinking, his decline, that was all true.
Or Lee Krasner, who becomes a suspect-ish,
Right.
sort of.
Right. No, Lee, of course, was very articulate. She gave a lot of interviews, so there's a lot of information about her. But, I practically live in her house and have been for 30 years. We have an extensive archive, and so I have a lot of that background material on her. And also the Easthampton Star, now that it's digitized and online, oh my gosh, what a treasure trove. You don't have to go to the microfilm and sit there, and do the reel, which used to be such a drag. But the Star has all the obituaries of some of these real characters. So you can get background information from that. The fact that Pollock's doctor died in a one-car crash, I knew that, but I didn't know that he essentially walked away from that crash and then died the next day. He evidently had a brain hemorrhage or internal bleeding in his brain, and it wasn't obvious. He just thought he had a headache, and then the next day, and he was a medical doctor, and he died.
Wow.
Also, Easthampton Library, another treasure trove, the Long Island collection. They have the logbook from the funeral parlor that has Jackson Pollock logged in, and on the next page, Edith Metzger.
Wow.
Because they actually had the bodies, they acted as kind of an unofficial morgue. And it's so revealing that how much his coffin cost. Wow. I mentioned it, I didn't mention the price in the book, but I said that it was an expensive coffin, and it was something like $600. Mm-hmm. And how much it cost to take out a death notice in the Herald Tribune, which doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. Things like that, little details like that are just so enriching to the whole story.
Definitely. And you have some art world sort of anecdotes in there that are not part of the plot, but just that you've peppered throughout your books. Are there any that are particular favorites that you enjoyed putting in your books?
Oh yeah. My very favorite in any of the books is the story that Paul Brock told me about getting Pollock's goat. Remember, this is right at the end of his life. He was going into the city more or less on a weekly basis and going to a psychiatrist. But then after he would leave the psychiatrist's office, he would go down to the Cedar Tavern and hang out with his drinking buddies. And Paul was younger by about 15 years. And he said that whenever Jackson would come in, he would head for the younger guys, and because they all had their wives and girlfriends with them, and he would put the make on these women. And, hey, baby, what are you hanging around with that loser for? Come with me. And he would stay over at the Hotel Earl off of Washington Square. And, the girls would be offended and the guys would get angry. And, of course, that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to rile them up. But they got a little tired of that. So 3 or 4 of the guys got together and they hired a call girl. And, not a streetwalker, a nice looking young woman who just happened to do it for money. And they told her what the story was, what they wanted. And in she marches with one of them on his arm. And she's like the new girlfriend. So Pollock immediately makes a beeline for her and puts the make on her and says, come on back to the Earl with me, honey. I'll show you what a real artist is capable of. And she says, oh, okay. And she starts to put her coat on. So Jackson, of course, he'd been bluffing all along. He knew perfectly well that these wives and sweethearts weren't going to go with him. But this girl says yes. So what does he do? He goes to the men's room and he pretty much never comes out. And Paul, of course, loved the story, because they got his goat. And he told me the story, and I put it in the book.
That's great. Yeah. Well, that's what's so great about all the books, that you, as I said, you, all these little anecdotes, and you know, they really make it to life. I mean, was Thomas Benton, was he were there some of those real stories about him berating people and all that? Were those all
Oh,
true?
yeah. Well, I don't know that he and Andy Warhol ever met. I mean, he did come to the city. He lived in Kansas City. He left the Art Students League in 1933. 30, you know, I guess 34 he resigned. He went in 33, he went to Chicago to do murals for the World's Fair. Then he came back briefly, and I think in 34, he went to the Kansas City Art Institute, and he taught there for a while. But his home was in Kansas City, and it still is. It's a museum now, and you can actually visit his studio. And he died in his studio in 1976, just finishing up a mural for the Truman Library. But anyway, I'm sorry, the Country Music Hall of Fame. That was the last one he did. But he was probably not ever encountered Andy Warhol. I gave him a fictional retrospective at the Whitney. He never had one, but that was the occasion to bring him to New York.
Okay.
So that was the way of getting him here. And then, of course, Warhol's entourage goes in and sees the show, and that's where they meet. So that is pure fiction.
Okay. And you make
Actually, somebody told me once that when they were reading one of these books, they were reading it and holding it in one hand and Googling with the other to try and figure out what was real and what wasn't.
I did the same thing. As I was Thomas Hart Benton, I'm like, is it, because you talk a lot about, is he gay or not? There's a big question there. So I was looking it up because I know he was married, but
well, that's not a guarantee.
True. But it doesn't sort of yeah.
Well, in one of his memoirs, he talks about having a homosexual encounter.
Okay.
But he does it in a very sort of flat-footed way, not judgmental. He's just sort of saying, well, this guy cozied up to me and I didn't really know what was going on until, you know, things started to happen. And but he doesn't say one way or the other whether he was disgusted by it or whether he was really homophobic. But there's always been some questions about whether he wasn't just a little over the top in terms of his masculinity, and like maybe he was laying it on too thick, because he did play that kind of country character to the hilt. And he was very much the sort of man's man persona. But whether or not that, I mean, I'm sure that he was not gay, but it's always intriguing to just, you know, put that little question in there, because then you can say, well, it's obvious that why he would reject this guy.
So you've written the fourth book, and now you're working on the fifth book, and you'll keep going with murder?
Stop me before I kill again.
I don't know.
Where is your next one set?
My next series is set in a fictional Caribbean island called Paraiso. So I've moved down south, you know. I'm trying to clean up Easthampton a little and let you keep killing.
Yeah, you've killed off everybody in Easthampton. Now you've got to move on to another island.
Exactly. So I think, should we open up for some questions?
Sure.
Stephen, do people have questions?
Does anyone have any questions for Carrie or Helen that they'd like to ask? If you'd like, please feel free to type a question in the chat, or if you'd like to use the raise hand feature, which is located on the tab of your console, we'll gladly acknowledge you. So just to be clear, the Artful Corpse comes out March 2nd, hits the stores March 2nd, and Carrie, your the new mystery comes out in June, is it?
So yes, my new book, my new series, Cozy Mystery series, comes out. The first one, It Takes Two to Mango, comes out in June. I don't name these. The second one is Something's Guava Give. That comes out in the fall. And then The Girl with the Dragon Fruit Tattoo will be the next one. Source Books has really great editors, and they also come up with great titles. And then I have a YA murder mystery set in a boarding school that comes out in April called The Murder Game, which that's a great title. It has nothing to do with the book, and already the Goodreads pre-readers are like, what does this cover and book title have anything to do with the book? But, you know, Barnes & Noble now weighs in on picking covers and titles, and so they picked that. So it's fine with me if they think it'll sell. That's great.
Well, I do have to give a shout out to Source Books for the covers. I think they really captured the feeling of the books, because the first one is set in the surrealist milieu, and they've got a nice surreal cover. The second one is all about a road accident, and abstract expressionism. So you've got a nice splashy cover that looks like tire tracks across the front. And the third one has got a kind of Warhol theme with the sort of poster-like look. So I think they did a really nice job of actually reflecting, to some degree, the content of the book.
Yeah, Source Books did a good job. And Source Books is a company. So Doomere Books, which originally published the books, was started myself, my sister, who's an author, Liz Carey, and another author, Tiffany Palmer, 3 women. We sold it after 3 years to Source Books, which was also started by a woman, Dominique Rocca, who sold 50% of her, or 49% of her company to Penguin Random House. So actually, it's, you know, a good story of women in publishing who are actually at the top. So nice to support them.
We have, let's see, a question. Amy asks, generally, how long do you spend writing your books? What portion of that is just research? And thank you. This has been interesting. I look forward to reading your series.
Oh, thank you very much. How long? Well, the first one took a long time, years, literally, because I had never written fiction before, and I was writing it a little bit at a time. And then I would leave it sometimes for a few months and then just pick it up again, which is one reason why the book is structured very episodically. But it worked for the surrealist theme, because there are some flashbacks, there are some little back and forths that kind of make it thematically work. The second one I wrote rather quickly. I think it took me just a few months, because I had so much material, and the story was already there. The excuse me, the automobile accident, the death, and I had the characters, of course, and I had the 2 characters who carried over from the previous one. Of course, for the third one, their son is now grown up. He's 19 years old, and he's going to the Art Students League. So he's more of the focus. But and again, with somebody like Thomas Hart Benton, you couldn't go wrong. So that one also went relatively easily. And the fourth one too, because some of these are people that I knew and knew personally. So I had a lot of first person information to go on.
This is an interesting question. Beverly asks, Helen, what about permissions from families? Do you ever have to get family permission to put the person in the story, or is it considered like a public domain, like the person's a celebrity that passed, so it's okay to put...
That's a very interesting question, because was it last night or the night before, the movie on television was Death on the Nile, which is Agatha Christie, and Peter Ustinov, and a wonderful cast. I mean, terrific.
Maggie Smith, Betty Davis, that's a good
Yeah,
one.
Betty Davis, and Angela Lansbury, who is the writer of very steamy romance novels. And she has written about this living character and apparently libeled her. And she's going to be sued. And of course, this is the person who gets killed, is the one who's going to sue her. But in the course of the story, it's mentioned you can't libel the dead, which of course is why she has to die, because then she'll be dead, she won't be able to sue. But that is the case. what you say about a dead person is whatever you say. It's not, you can't be sued for libel. And I did not ask anybody's permission except the living people whom I didn't want to offend. But whatever I say about Thomas Hart Benton, it might offend Jesse Benton, but that's just too bad because he's dead.
Interesting. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, they've made Abraham Lincoln a vampire hunter, and
Right.
there's been so many, you know, of alternate histories and alternate realities. I mean, even if you jump to film, Quentin Tarantino's most recent film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, was an alternate reality. Everybody, you know, history happened as what happened, but he made some changes to some things, but everybody pretty much is deceased. So it's,
Well, you know, that's also the case when you have, like a history book that sort of rewrites history, revisionist history. Now there you might have quote unquote alternative facts, but you're assuming that this is based on new research that's uncovered things that weren't available to previous writers. Or you have hagiography, where a lot of good stuff is just left out because they want to make the subject look good. So it's not factual, it's not fiction, but it's not the truth. So there are a lot of different levels of this. And of course, people have gotten in trouble for making false claims about somebody in reality. But these are fictional books. So if you're writing fiction, you can take liberties that you wouldn't want to take if you're writing a biography or if you're writing a historical treatise.
let's see, we have, this one, Jerry Siegel has enjoyed all of your books, and he says, thank
great.
you. Thank you for that. Robert asks, Helen, have you ever considered writing yourself into the series?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because in An Artful Corpse, Ellen Jameson is based on me. I think I give her some attributes that I wish I had had, but she worked at the bitter end and so did I. She goes to the Art Students League and so did I. So I did draw on personal experience for some of the characterization. And she looks a little bit like me, although of course I made her prettier, but there's a definite echo of me in her.
Did you also play in a band?
Yeah, I had a roommate named Michelle who was my co-singer. We actually, we were semi-professional, but we did go to the Hootenannies at the bitter end, and we met all those people who were there. So it was that really is from my own personal experience.
But would you ever put yourself as Helen Harrison in the books?
That's not nearly as much fun.
Yeah. Well, that's what Anthony Horowitz, the writer, has started to do with his series, The Word is Murder and Sentence is Death. He's himself, and as a writer trying to solve the crime, it's interesting.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, one could do that. I have to say I'd like to try reading those, but that wasn't, it wouldn't have worked because of just the way I needed that character to behave and the things that I needed her to do. I would have been more of a bystander, and I needed her to be more active participant.
We have a question from Beverly. I guess this is a question, did Klingman actually speak with you?
Yes. Oh, yes, she did. Yeah, when she came to the house, she knew that I wrote for the New York Times, and she called my editor, and she didn't call me directly. She called my editor and asked whether or not he could arrange for her to go there. She wanted a go-between, And he called me up and he laughed. He said, "You'll never believe this, but Ruth Klingman wants me to fix it with you." And I said, "We're a museum. It's open to the public. She's welcome." So she showed up. She had a girlfriend with her and a driver, and she wanted reinforcements. But she was very respectful. I have to say, I was afraid she might get a little histrionic, but she did not. She was very respectful and just asked me if I could give her painting. I said, "Sorry, no can do."
Let's see, Hersey says, "Thank you, Helen, for this awesome presentation. I'm excited to read your books and enjoy the mystery and the stories of the artists in Easthampton." Amy asks, "Clearly you've had an interesting life. Would you ever consider writing a memoir?"
It'll be a tell-all, believe me. No, I've had a pretty sedate life, really. I mean, I've done interesting things, but I don't think anyone really needs to know about me. I'd much rather make it up.
And Esperanza says, "Thank you, Helen and Carrie, for your creative contributions. Fascinating presentation. And they'd love to read that memoir if it ever comes out."
I'll have to make up a lot of exciting things.
I doubt that, Helen. You have a lot of good stories, so I think it would be a great memoir.
Well, I could definitely write a memoir about the people who come into the Pollock Krasner house. We had some real characters.
I'd like to just make a little shout out before we end tonight. But if anybody is interested in attending the Pollock Krasner House now on a virtual note, on January 19th from 4 to 5 o'clock p.m., we're going to have a Zoom tour of the Pollock Krasner House for adults being presented by Joyce Raimondo.
Mm-hmm.
And I have sign up on Eventbrite and on the Easthampton Library's homepage. So if anybody would like to sign up for that virtual tour, it's totally free and you're welcome to sign up.
Oh yeah, and I should say Joyce has been wonderful. Back in March when we weren't even open. And when we first knew that we were not going to be able to open, she said, "Why don't we do it on Zoom?" I said, "What's Zoom?" I didn't know. I'd never used it, never heard of it. And she said, "Oh, it's this platform. We could take people on a tour. I'll use my laptop." And I said, "Go ahead, whatever." And it's been great. I was just totaling up the number we've had 154 Zoom tours and just, hundreds and hundreds of people from all over the world. So it's been a real lifesaver in terms of outreach. And we will probably keep doing it because it's so much more inclusive.
Well, I thank you, Helen Harrison and Carrie Doyle, for this excellent event. And I'd also like to thank everybody for Zooming in this evening and with the questions and the insight. And we wish you both the best of luck. If you're in Easthampton, the Corpse series is available at the Easthampton Library. The third book we have on order, and we have Carrie Doyle's mysteries also in the collection. And we look forward to reading more nice, these wonderful, cozy murder mysteries.
See who else we're going to kill off.
Yes, yes.
You will know some of them.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks everybody for coming. And Helen, thanks so much. It's always such a blast chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And give my best to Liz and to all the folks who joined in today. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
And have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.